Jonathan Blake, a mid-career novelist struggling with writer's block, sat at his desk, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop. His once promising career had hit a standstill, and the pressure to produce his next bestseller was suffocating. As the hours ticked by with no progress, he decided to take a break and clear his mind by tackling a long-overdue task: cleaning out the attic. The attic was a treasure trove of forgotten memories and neglected items. Dust particles danced in the beam of his flashlight as he rummaged through old boxes and discarded furniture. Amidst the clutter, something caught his eye: a vintage typewriter, its keys tarnished but intact. The heavy antique machine exuded a peculiar charm, and Jonathan felt an inexplicable pull toward it. He carried it downstairs, setting it on his desk as a decorative piece, a reminder of the golden age of writing. That night, Jonathan fell into a restless sleep, his dreams a tangled web of unfinished stories and elusive inspiration. A faint, rhythmic clacking sound seeped into his subconscious, gradually pulling him from the depths of slumber. He awoke with a start, the sound of typing echoing through his quiet home. His heart pounded as he crept toward his study, the noise growing louder with each step. Pushing open the door, Jonathan froze. The typewriter, seemingly of its own accord, was producing a manuscript. The keys moved with an eerie precision, spelling out words on the yellowed paper. He watched in stunned silence until the typing ceased. The room fell silent, the only sound the rustling of the paper as he carefully pulled it from the typewriter. The manuscript was a chilling account of a fire at Elmwood Elementary School, complete with specific details: the date, the time, and the exact sequence of events leading to the tragedy. Jonathan's hands trembled as he read, his mind racing to rationalize what he was seeing. He dismissed it as a bizarre prank, or perhaps his own sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on him. The following morning, Jonathan's sense of unease grew as he prepared for the day. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. On his way to grab a coffee, he overheard a group of people talking in hushed, urgent tones. He strained to catch their words, feeling a cold dread settle in his stomach. Fire at Elmwood Elementary. Devastating. Jonathan's blood ran cold. He rushed to the nearest newsstand, his eyes scanning the headlines. There it was, splashed across the front page: Tragic fire at Elmwood Elementary School claims lives. The article described the event in chilling detail, matching the manuscript exactly. Shock and horror washed over him. The manuscript had predicted the fire with uncanny accuracy. His mind swirled with questions. How was this possible? Who or what was responsible for the manuscript? Desperate for answers, Jonathan returned home, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. He spent hours examining the typewriter, looking for hidden mechanisms or clues, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Exhausted and frustrated, he finally gave up and collapsed into his chair, staring at the silent machine. That night, sleep eluded him as he pondered the implications of what had happened. Was it a coincidence? A cruel joke? Or something far more sinister? As dawn broke, Jonathan made a decision. He would keep the typewriter, hoping that it would provide more clues. He couldn't ignore the eerie sense of responsibility he felt. If the typewriter had more predictions, he needed to know, and he needed to act. Little did he know, his life was about to take a turn into the unknown, where reality and the supernatural intertwined, and the boundaries of fate and free will would be tested. Days turned into a week, and Jonathan began to doubt the strange events surrounding the typewriter. His initial shock and fear gradually gave way to skepticism and an attempt to return to normalcy. Yet, a gnawing curiosity and an underlying dread persisted, making him jump at every creak and groan of his old house. One evening, a fierce storm rolled in, its thunderclaps shaking the windows of Jonathan's study. Rain lashed against the glass, creating a symphony of unsettling sounds. Jonathan, struggling to focus on his writing, found his eyes drawn repeatedly to the typewriter. He had tried to write on it once, but the keys remained stubbornly silent under his fingers, as if the machine had a mind of its own. As the storm reached its peak, Jonathan decided to call it a night. He turned off his laptop and was about to head to bed when the typewriter's keys began clacking furiously. He froze, heart pounding, watching the typewriter produce a new manuscript. The rhythmic sound filled the room, punctuated by the occasional boom of thunder. Gathering his courage, Jonathan approached the desk and pulled the paper from the typewriter. His hands trembled as he read the words. This time, the manuscript detailed a horrific car accident involving a prominent local politician, Senator Emily Reynolds. The description was vivid, including the exact time and location of the crash and the sequence of events that led to the tragedy. Jonathan's mind raced. The accuracy of the previous manuscript had left no room for doubt. This was another prediction. But unlike the fire, this time he had the chance to prevent the disaster. He had to act quickly. The next morning, Jonathan made several calls to the politician's office. His attempts to explain the situation were met with skepticism and polite dismissals. Frustration boiled within him, but he refused to give up. Determined, he drove to the senator's campaign headquarters, hoping a face-to-face meeting would convince them of the urgency. After a long wait, Jonathan was finally ushered into a conference room where Senator Reynolds's chief of staff, Michael Donovan, greeted him with a wary smile. Jonathan quickly relayed the information, emphasizing the detailed prediction in the manuscript. Michael listened patiently, but remained unconvinced. "Mr. Blake, I appreciate your concern, but this sounds like a plot from one of your novels. We can't just cancel the senator's plans based on a mysterious typewritten page," Michael said, his tone firm but not unkind. Desperate, Jonathan decided to show the manuscript. He handed it over, watching Michael's expression shift from skepticism to unease as he read. The specificity and detail were hard to dismiss. "Fine," Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll take some precautions, but I can't promise anything. The senator has a tight schedule, and we can't afford to alarm her without concrete evidence." Jonathan left the office feeling only partially relieved. He had done all he could, but doubts gnawed at him. Would they truly take his warning seriously? That evening, Jonathan tuned into the local news, anxiously awaiting updates. Hours passed with no mention of an accident. Finally, a breaking news segment caught his attention. The senator's convoy had been rerouted due to unforeseen security concerns, narrowly avoiding a major pileup on the exact stretch of highway described in the manuscript. While several cars were involved in the crash, the senator was unharmed. Jonathan's heart raced with a mix of relief and exhilaration. He had managed to prevent the disaster, but the realization of his new role dawned on him with a heavy weight. He was now a guardian of sorts, a reluctant hero bound to a ghostly writer whose predictions were infallible. But the experience left him with more questions than answers. Who was the ghostly writer? Why was he chosen as the recipient of these manuscripts? And most importantly, what was the ultimate purpose behind these eerie predictions? Jonathan knew that he couldn't let his guard down. The typewriter was silent for now, but he sensed it was only a matter of time before the next prophecy would appear, thrusting him once again into a desperate race against fate. Jonathan's life had become a nightmare of sleepless nights and constant paranoia. The typewriter remained silent for a week, giving him a brief respite but leaving him on edge, waiting for the next ominous message. He tried to focus on his writing, but every creak of the house and every gust of wind felt like a harbinger of doom. His thoughts were consumed by the implications of the ghostly manuscripts and the responsibility they bestowed upon him. One evening, as Jonathan sat in his study, the typewriter suddenly sprang to life. The clacking of the keys echoed through the room, sending a shiver down his spine. He watched, transfixed, as the typewriter produced another manuscript. The sense of dread returned, sharper and more insistent than ever. This manuscript was more detailed and urgent than the previous ones. It described a terrorist attack at a local music festival, set to occur in just 2 days. The document included specific details: the time, the location, and the method of the attack. Jonathan's heart raced as he read the chilling words. The stakes were higher than ever, and he knew he had to act fast to prevent the impending disaster. Jonathan immediately called the police, but his frantic warnings were met with skepticism and disbelief. The officer on the other end of the line dismissed his story as a prank or a figment of his imagination. Frustrated and desperate, Jonathan decided to take matters into his own hands. He contacted the event organizers, hoping they would take him seriously. He spent hours on the phone, pleading with anyone who would listen, but met with the same dismissive attitude. With no other options, Jonathan decided to go to the festival himself. On the day of the event, he arrived early, scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. The festival grounds were bustling with people, and the atmosphere was filled with music and laughter. Jonathan felt a pang of guilt for the fear he was about to sow, but he knew he had no choice. He approached the security personnel, showing them the manuscript and explaining the situation. Initially skeptical, the head of security, a burly man named Dave, agreed to increase patrols and keep a closer watch on the area. Jonathan's nerves were stretched thin as he roamed the festival grounds, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. Hours passed without incident, and Jonathan began to doubt himself. Maybe the prediction was wrong this time, or perhaps he had misinterpreted it. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed a man acting strangely near the main stage. The man was carrying a large backpack and seemed to be avoiding eye contact with everyone around him. Jonathan's instinct screamed at him to act. He approached Dave, pointing out the suspicious man. Dave signaled his team, and they moved in to apprehend the individual. As they detained the man and searched his backpack, they discovered a collection of explosive devices, just as the manuscript had predicted. The crowd was evacuated, and the festival was shut down. While the attendees were confused and upset, a potential catastrophe had been averted. Jonathan returned home, exhausted but relieved. However, his actions had not gone unnoticed. That night, as he tried to unwind with a glass of whiskey, He felt an unsettling presence. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and he had the eerie sensation of being watched. He dismissed it as paranoia, the after-effects of the day's events. But the feeling persisted. Over the next few days, Jonathan noticed subtle signs that someone was keeping tabs on him. His phone calls were interrupted by strange clicks and static. He spotted unfamiliar cars parked near his house and strangers loitering on his street. His home was broken into twice, yet nothing was stolen. The intruders seemed to be searching for something, but he couldn't figure out what. One night, Jonathan found a threatening note slipped under his door. The message was clear: stop interfering or face the consequences. The note was unsigned, but the implication was unmistakable. His actions had drawn the attention of powerful, dangerous people who had a vested interest in the chaos he was preventing. Jonathan's paranoia deepened. He started changing his routines, taking different routes when he went out, and avoiding predictable patterns. He rarely left his house, and when he did, he constantly looked over his shoulder. His sleep was plagued by nightmares, and he found himself jumping at every sound. Despite the growing threat to his own life, Jonathan felt a sense of duty. The typewriter continued to deliver its eerie messages, and he knew he couldn't ignore them. Each new manuscript brought another potential disaster, and each time he took it upon himself to prevent the worst from happening. The weight of the responsibility was crushing, but he couldn't turn his back on the innocent lives at stake. As he navigated this dangerous new reality, Jonathan couldn't help but wonder about the ghostly writer. Who were they? What was their motive? And why had they chosen him as their conduit? The more he pondered these questions, the more he realized that he needed to uncover the truth behind the typewriter and the enigmatic force driving its predictions. His life depended on it, and so did the lives of countless others. Jonathan's life had become an unending cycle of fear, exhaustion, and fleeting moments of triumph. The typewriter's predictions continued to save lives, but each success came at a greater personal cost. The shadowy figures watching him became more aggressive, and the threats against his life more explicit. Despite the danger, Jonathan pressed on, driven by an overwhelming sense of duty. One night, as Jonathan sat in his study, the typewriter began to clack once more. This time, the sound filled him with an overwhelming dread. He watched the keys move, producing what he feared might be his final manuscript. The document described his own death in chilling detail. The prediction outlined an elaborate plot orchestrated by the very enemies he had made while preventing disasters. It included the exact time, location, and method of his assassination. The manuscript was explicit. Jonathan would be cornered and killed in a secluded alleyway behind a local television studio. The attack was set to occur after he gave a live interview, exposing the truth about the ghostly writer and the prophecies. The detailed description of his death left him shaken, but he knew what he had to do. Jonathan realized he had one last chance to change the outcome. He decided to go public with his story, hoping to expose the truth and protect himself. He contacted a trusted journalist, Sarah Mitchell, known for her integrity and fearless reporting. He arranged for an exclusive live interview, revealing everything about the ghostly writer and the prophetic manuscripts. On the day of the interview, Jonathan was a bundle of nerves. He knew the risks, but he also knew that the truth had to be told. As the cameras rolled and the interview began, Jonathan recounted his experiences, the uncanny predictions, and the lives saved. He held nothing back, describing the threats against him and the shadowy figures trying to silence him. Sarah listened intently, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and fascination. As the interview drew to a close, Jonathan took a deep breath and delivered his final message. To those who wish to harm me, know this. The truth will come out. You can't stop it. The future is in our hands, and we must fight for it. As the broadcast ended, Jonathan felt a sense of relief, but also a growing sense of dread. He knew his enemies would not take this lightly. He left the studio, accompanied by Sarah and her crew. They offered to drive him home, but Jonathan declined, fearing for their safety. He walked the streets, his senses heightened, every shadow and sound amplifying his paranoia. He approached the alleyway described in the manuscript, aware of the potential trap but determined to face it head-on. As he entered the alley, the eerie silence was broken by footsteps echoing behind him. Jonathan turned to see a dark figure emerging from the shadows, a weapon glinting in their hand. His heart raced, but he stood his ground. "I know what you're here to do," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "But it's too late. The truth is out there now." The assassin stepped closer, a malicious grin spreading across their face. "You should have stayed silent, Blake. Now, you'll pay the price." They raised the weapon, but before they could strike, the alley was flooded with light as police cars screeched to a halt at both ends. "Drop the weapon! Hands in the air!" Officers shouted, guns drawn. The assassin hesitated, then bolted, but was quickly apprehended. Jonathan watched in stunned relief as his would-be killer was taken into custody. The police had been monitoring the live broadcast and had traced Jonathan's location, arriving just in time to save him. However, the price Jonathan paid for his bravery was steep. The constant stress and fear had taken a toll on his health, and he knew he couldn't continue living under such pressure. Despite the authorities' assurances of protection, Jonathan decided to disappear, leaving behind his life as a novelist and the cursed typewriter. In the days that followed, Sarah published a series of articles detailing Jonathan's story, the mysterious typewriter, and the attempts on his life. Public interest surged, and the enigmatic tale of Jonathan Blake and the ghostly writer captured the imagination of millions. The typewriter, now silent, was found with one last message. "The future is in your hands." Jonathan vanished without a trace, his whereabouts unknown. Some believed he had gone into hiding, others speculated he had succumbed to the pressures and taken his own life. But those who knew the full story believed that he had found a way to escape his fate, leaving behind a legacy of mystery and heroism. The manuscript ceased to appear, and the typewriter remained an eerie relic of a battle against fate and the unknown. Years later, whispers of a man resembling Jonathan were heard in distant towns, always moving, never staying in one place for long. And in those towns, there were stories of disasters narrowly averted, lives saved by an unseen hand. The legend of the phantom writer and his reluctant hero lived on, a testament to the enduring power of truth and the human spirit's fight against darkness.